Døyr fei, døya frender, døyr sjálvrit sama. En ordstír døyr aldrig, kveimer ser góðan getur. Døyr fei, døya frender, døyr sjálvrit sama. Eg vet ein at aldri døyr, dómur dauðan kvern. You're listening to the Hamingja Podcast, the renaissance of Western spirituality, paganism and animism. We show the Dharmic path and common origin of Norse, Germanic, Vedic, Greco-Roman, Celtic, Balto-Slavic and Persian beliefs. We also draw parallels to the Proto-Indo-European worldview and the ancient beliefs we call the religion with no name. The Hamingja Podcast weaves the threads together to understand where we come from and let our true nature empower us in everyday life. We don't have to turn to the east. The answers were always right here. We are all pagan by instinct. Welcome to the Hamingja Podcast. The wild hunt and Ragnarök is over, and now that the smoke has cleared, I'm happy to announce that the winter spirits have been chased away and Baldur is victorious. The sun has been reborn. And speaking of rebirth, how often I hear people say, I don't want to die, I want to live forever. And to all of you listeners who have ever said that, I can delight you with the calming words that you will. But the question here isn't really about whether you'll live forever or not, but rather what you really means and how you're going to live. Because the most important isn't to live, but to live well. Walking on the Père Lachaise cemetery in Paris, I once saw a gravestone where it said Ici repose celui qui est mort alors qu'il était encore en vie. Here rests he who died when he was still alive. That actually moved me to tears, because again, life itself isn't the most important, but to quote Gandalf, all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. It's not that simple as what you yourself, the person you are today, who looks the way you do now, simply go to a new place that will be your forever home. That's not going to happen. The shape we have today is but a vehicle for something bigger and more important, something immortal. Even mantra means the vehicle of man or the vehicle of the mind. So the shape you are in right now is the frequency your spirit takes on at the moment. It is the song your spirit is singing right now. This episode is about atman, the immortal soul and the parts of the self. What it means and takes to be immortal. The words you heard in the beginning was the famous verses 76 and 77 from Hávamál, the High One's song, the Viking Age poetry collection. Odin himself says, Cattle die, kinsmen die, you yourself will die, but the good name never dies of one who has earned glory. Cattle die, kinsmen die, you too will die, but I know one thing that never dies, the glory of the great dead. He teaches us that most things will perish, you too will die. But wait, didn't you say that I was immortal? Once again, what of the I or the self is it that's going to survive? And are there several existences where we might end up? In this stanza, Odin shows us that we consist of a multitude of parts, and he also shows us that at least two things live on: glory and a good name. It's like I said, that what we do in life matters for the outcome, and also Odin means our real name, our individual atman in the eternal Brahman, not just Martin or Lisa or Stephanie. The Indo-European spirituality and the pagan view of existence and the self is very complex. There's no single soul as such. For example, the Old Norse word for soul, sol, was invented only after the conversion to Christianity. Instead, there are rather various elements with their own importance, identity, conscience, and degree of immortality. So how did this concept get to be so strong among the Vedic, Greek, Roman, Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, Norse, Slavic, and many other peoples? And why is the whole Hindu faith today built upon the notion of the immortal part of yourself? As so often, we have to go to our oldest ancestors, the Proto-Indo-Europeans. They divided the person and the self into three separate components. And us pagans still do that today. Each component can then be divided into several other elements, but let's take it from the beginning. The first part of yourself is the most obvious one, the material world and your own vehicle in this world. It's that of conditioned existence. It is your flesh and your senses, what you see and feel around you, and your ability to do so. Your body, your mind, your memory, your senses, and everything that is matter. Your existence in the physical realm. The Proto-Indo-Europeans called this kvistis, the mechanism for your being in the material world. Your thought, understanding, and reasoning, your senses and personality, everything that's connected to things that are already organized in the chartus, with a will that is already determined and therefore corresponding to the processes of combustion that constitute samsara. It is everything that is perishable. Plato and the ancient Greeks called this component epitumetikon, your appetite for the physical world, or the little desirer. The animal instincts, the earthly and carnal desires, your need for food, etc. This is the lowest part of the self. The Vedic sources have a metaphor that if your whole soul were a body, then this component would be likened to your gut and genitalia. In this category, we, among other things, find what the Proto-Indo-Europeans called lig, kam, and mintnis. These are, of course, what the Norse much later called likr, hamr, and mini, or munin. Your physical body, your cover or shape, your mind, memory, and knowledge. Interestingly, the word lik in Swedish still means corpse. So your likr is basically the body without the other two components inherent in it. Our mintnis, the memory, is perishable in the sense that although it does stay with us, at least as long as we're in the physical realm and samsara, it is so far back in our consciousness that when we are reborn into new lives, we have to take significant action and measures to remember ourselves and overcome that amnesia we've incurred after crossing the rivers to the death realm. Odin even says that he sends out his two ravens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, every day, and he's afraid that one day only one of them will return. But we should never forget that as long as we're in samsara, the memories are always there, somewhere. The memories of previous lives, of our genetics and ancestry, and of past actions and deeds. Modern epigenetic science proves that everything that's ever happened to you alters your genes, and both you in future lives and your descendants will remember this. It'll change their hamr. The hugr, our personality, mind and thoughts, also belong here, and obviously perishes when we pass away. There are more elements in this category, but instead of bringing them all up, I'll make specific episodes on them. This first component is equal with the individual economic or productive function in Georges Dumézil's description of the Indo-European tripartite society and view of man. The other two are the martial and the sacral, that we'll come to in a while. We often hear the Abrahamic faiths, and nowadays even the very monotheistic modern Hinduism and Vaishnavism, saying that this first part of the human being and the universe is false, that all matter, physical aspects and desire is just an illusion and should be renounced. That you don't have to think about this place since we are waiting for paradise in a galaxy far, far away. This is a perspective that has gone very far from the initial Indo-European one. Heraclitus was of course right when he said that we can't step down in the same river twice. All things must pass. It won't be the exact same water when we step down again, but at least it will be the same flow, the same direction, even the same river banks setting the framework. So the initial Indo-European view was that all aspects should be revered. My name is Björn today, but that's just a temporary name. What will it be in 100, 1,000, 10,000 years? Even though we all have momentary names, we also have a true name, but that belongs to component 2 and 3. Among the Indo-European peoples, it was believed that most people were so occupied with this first component and all that belongs to it, like physical possessions and ego, that they'd never transcend death. They'd be forever trapped in samsara, until hopefully they reached a higher consciousness and started following dharma and taking the right actions. The more attached you are to this part of the soul and your possessions in life, the more you identify with something that is temporary, the less likely it is that you'll grow and that anything of you will pass on to the next level. It's not at all that this aspect isn't real or that it doesn't matter. It's just that we can't let it run and control our lives. This is exactly what modern society is doing to us right now. It's making us put too much concern about and focus on things that in the best of worlds would be a vehicle for the mind, but instead is making us anxious, empty, purposeless, broken down, immoral, envious, jealous, and obsessed. It's also much easier to be controlled and enslaved if this is your sole focus. We so easily get carried away and dragged into the race of materialism and ego. We mistake the wish to grow as a person with the wish to grow attention and the amount of belongings. The Vedic term artha means wealth and a rich life, often interpreted as your profession and what you do to create the situation you want in life. And it is important to build an auspicious and comfortable life for you and your family. But the original sense of artha was what makes you feel truly rich in life, what would still be there even if someone would take everything away from you. Love, family, friends, experience, knowledge, and following your calling in life, not just working more to be able to buy more stuff. This is the best interpretation of what everyday life means. We have to reflect upon what growth and progress really means to us. In modern society and in the Kali Yuga, we seem to have forgotten about other aspects of life and reality than who makes the most money at the expense of others, or who got the most likes on a picture of what you won't even look like in 10 years anyway. It's all about ego and material prosperity. My precious, my precious. Don't be like Gollum. Instead, ask yourself what you really need, what really makes you happy, and what things have gotten out of hand and started controlling your life. We need to love ourselves and this aspect of ourselves, but also minimize it and balance it out with other essentials. That balance is what yoga originally meant. The word yoga literally means yoke. And true yoga is to anchor all three components of yourself to each other, to find harmony between matter and spirit. So even though this aspect is mortal and withers, it doesn't mean that it is unnecessary or reprehensible. On the contrary, Chartus wants life, and life should be fully lived, experienced, understood, and enjoyed. Life is beautiful, and as I often say, the meaning of life is to live life, to grow like the tree. To reject life is unnatural. It is a-dharma. When other religions teach to hold back and to despise worldly things and life on earth, when they worship death, then Indo-European spirituality is the complete opposite. We love the earth and nature. We love life, and we love to be alive. We should explore ourselves. Explore all aspects of life. Explore its beauty and act with beauty. Do honorable things and be the hero of our own story. Life is about exploring, trial and error, and growing. It's about natural selection. Only those who master life and act in accordance with natural order can take the next step. To start understanding our divine self, we need to understand our life here. We can only start from where we are. We should live life to the fullest, but be aware that this is not everything. Understand that we are more than this. So we make sure that we master our lives instead of letting worldly things, ego and desire master us. After all, we are not dragons who jealously and selfishly sit on our riches to guard it and keep it to ourselves. Instead, we understand that a rich life is a shared life, that we are rich when we act like the divine, that we are rich when we give of ourselves, and that abundance comes from elsewhere. Every insightful person who's in contact with his or her feelings understand that there's more to life and existence than money on the bank, the objects you carry with you, or 100,000 followers on Instagram. Everyone who's in contact with oneself is longing to grow. It is your dharma to long. It is your dharma to grow. This is spirituality. You want to have money, power, pleasure, admiration in life? This is spirituality too. It is the biggest we know until we grow out of it. Like the child grows out of its clothes. And when we stop asking ourselves, what about me? Then we've grown into something bigger. This is spirituality too. Start where you are right now and start knowing thyself. Paganism is about mastery, and this earthly life is supposed to be lived and mastered to the fullest, to be lived with arethere, for us to be able to also understand ourselves and the connection between the material and the spiritual, the purusha and prakriti. To be whole, we mustn't disparage or denounce this life and world. We don't reject this aspect of existence. On the contrary, we esteem it and balance it with the other levels. We can't be whole without the full picture. The key here is that physical life is important. This world is important. Life here is beautiful. And it's important to live it to the fullest, to honor your life and to honor what Chartus has given. And it's important to be rich. Rich in the sense that if we don't have, we can't give. So life is about growing and acquiring. Acquiring wealth, skill, wisdom, experience, empathy, love, and spirituality that we can pass on for others to benefit and grow. We mustn't forget that we live in an eternal and reciprocal gift-giving cycle. Let me end this part by quoting Rig Veda, the earliest Vedic scripture. Let the stronger man give to the man whose need is greater. Let him gaze upon the lengthening path of life, for riches roll like the wheels of a chariot, turning from one to another. The second component of the self is all about the words Odin told us in the opening of this episode. It's about the name you've made for yourself, your actions, and what you're known to be like as a person. If we ask ourselves, what do I want to be remembered for down the line? Then that pretty much sums up this second element. It's basically your brand. Remember that branding was originally something made on livestock. You burnt cattle with a glowing hot object, and the mark stayed with them for the rest of their lives. The brand you've built during your many lifetimes, the characteristics you're known for, they don't go away. It'll always color and influence your future. The Proto-Indo-Europeans called this element of the self klevos, meaning fame or heard of. That someone's heard of you, and hopefully for a good reason. That we make sure that this life will be a good memory for ourselves and for our surroundings. Klevos is the human desire for recognition, not because of vanity, but because the divine in us is telling us to grow and to do beautiful things. The divine within is speaking to us, calling us to make the Chartus even more beautiful than it was before we entered the stage. With the insight that the Christis and the volatile and perishable aspect of yourself isn't immortal in the real sense, then this calls upon the desire to live on through imperishable honor, glory, and fame. It manifests as aspiration, strive, the wish to accomplish something in life, not the least the courage to follow our calling and excelling within that field. In fact, the very word Slav, as in Slavic, stems from klevos, which shows what was truly important to pagan peoples, to be immortalized and remembered by name, individually and as a people. The ancient Greeks called this concept kleos, and the Celts called it klu, with the meaning honor, reputation, and praise. And they are both, of course, cognate with klevos. The Homeric hymns, the works of the Celtic bards and the Germanic skalds are all about this. Same thing with the two Sanskrit epics of Mahabharata and Ramayana. And we've already heard it in the Hávamál. In the Odyssey and Iliad, Telemachus constantly worries about that he and his father have been deprived of kleos. And in Plato's dialogues, he lets Diotima explain that people search for ways to reach some kind of immortality. She then asserts that the love for fame and glory is very strong, and in fact to obtain it, people are ready to engage in the greatest effort and to take risks and make sacrifices even at the cost of their lives. There's a reason both oath-swearing and storytelling is so important among all the Dharmic peoples. There's a constant talking about those who will be remembered for the great things they did for themselves, for their dear ones, and for their community. Their names will be sung over and over again. You might have noticed that in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, songs and music is always heard when the elves are present. We all know by now that elf is the Norse word alfar, meaning the shining ancestors. And Tolkien, always associating them with songs, is a metaphor for the saying that as long as someone, so to say, sings your name, you cannot die. You'll live forever, because what is remembered lives. Plato calls this part of the self thumoides, something that is spirited and focused on mastery, honor, and victory. We see this sanguinity and frenzied spiritedness with Odin too, the wish for distinction and recognition, and the hot-blooded desire to live on forever. Georges Dumézil calls this the martial function in his description of the Indo-European tripartite society. To him, this has to do with society itself, the wish to be accepted and prominent, both as an individual in the group, but also as a group in the bigger society. So your klevos, albeit individual, belongs to society and social bonds. And it's only among people and in societies it is immortal. So these traits and characteristics also belong to your genes, kin, and the society you live in. This is why I've said that the klevos actually precedes the first component. Your individual and ancestral prosperity and eminence attaches to the fetus even before the features, traits, and personality. It is, so to say, something that inhabits you. And here we have a connection to the fylgja, the follower, your guardian spirit or totem that runs in your family and gives you success or difficulties based on previous individual and collective actions. The klevos, here in the shape of the fylgja, comes via the umbilical cord and follows the child out with the afterbirth, and after that always following you in life in the shape of your totem spirit. The Fylgja never leaves you as long as you're in the samsara. It is what the Greeks called daimon and the Romans called genius. The totem spirit has the shape of an animal, and it represents the true nature of the immortal parts of you. Many important figures throughout history have, for example, been associated with bears. So here we see the connections between Klevos, the bear cult, berserkers, and the holy Koiros warriors, the typical Indo-European warrior bands that set out when summer pasture was over and were part of the wild hunt. If we once again take the Vedic metaphor of the soul as a body, this part would be likened with your arms and legs. That's to say the parts you act with, for good or for bad. And here we come to karma or Hamingja and dharma, the two most important parts of this component. Dharma has been covered in episode 4, and karma will of course get its own episode. But in brief, karma is Sanskrit for action, and Hamingja is its Norse equivalent. Action or cause, as in cause and effect. It's our imprinted memory of every physical, spiritual, and emotional action we've ever done. It is what creates the programming and framework for what we will experience in the future. We create patterns for ourselves based on our actions. It is causality. You reap what you sow. Hamingja means walking in shapes. So the honorable or dishonorable deeds we do and the thoughts we have shape ourself and the future, redefine our future self and conditions. All of this influences your success, prosperity, and well-being in the future. You take on the shape of what you've done in previous lives. You are what you think and do. Your karma or Hamingja follows you wherever or whenever you go in this universe. It is the choices you've made, your actions throughout time, and they will forever come back to you, to elevate you or to haunt you. Remember, it is the choice we make, valor. Already the Proto-Indo-Europeans had the word dharma. Among them it was called dharmen. Imagine that these concepts have been in our minds for at least 9,000 years, most likely much, much longer. Since dharma means the eternal natural order of things, it is what's natural. It is the inner nature and core of things. For example, it is the dharma of fire to burn. So your dharma, your swa-dharma, is your calling and duty, your own inner nature in the great natural order. It is your dharma to grow and to make the Chartus beautiful. And how do you do that? With the right actions, of course, the right Hamingja. It's against this background we understand that to acquire Klevos, we need to achieve karma or Hamingja through actions that align with our dharma. We need to use kvistis, the first and physical component of the self, for beautiful and honorable actions, so that we can transcend it. Are you known for following your dharma? Do people see you as a role model since you're strengthening your Hamingja? Has it been heard of that you did the right karma? Then your life will be remembered and deathless. Klevos is a fundamental element of Indo-European spirituality and is the very origin of and reason for ancestor worship. It is the reason Indo-Europeans entered the graves of the ancestors. They wanted to be close to the accumulated honor and eternal life force. They wanted to be the ancestors, so they went into the grave to pick up the stone on the dead person's chest, since it contained all the life force, and they hung it around their own neck. Klevos too stays in this world, in the eternal samsara. Life force and honor is only immortal within the cycle of rebirth. It is connected to life, and it's a very important thing to have. But you might be wondering, is this limited and perishable too? Doesn't it matter, since we want to exit life and only strive for the highest aspect? Then I can reassure you that it does matter, preeminently. Because first of all, some parts of you are going to live in this world and dimension for many, many thousands of lives in the eternal cycle of samsara. Your energy is going to be here. So you want a good companion along the way. And are you going to affect this world and everything in it in a positive or negative way? The actions you take, the decisions you make, everything that you build or ruin is going to influence both your future self, your children, and future generations. It doesn't go away. Samsara is forever. So are you going to give those close to you a head start or a disadvantage in life? And secondly, this aspect, your arethere, your following dharma, your making the chartus beautiful, your will, your understanding of how the divine works, and your enlightenment will of course make it easier to find and acknowledge the highest and truest aspect of yourself. Make it easier to heal yourself. Make yourself whole by connecting to the ultimate beauty, the divine. In Rig Veda we read, "The person who is always involved in great deeds experiences incessant divine happiness." The third component of the self is truth itself. It is your individual fragment of Brahman or Chartus, your personal share of the divine. It is atman, or as the Proto-Indo-Europeans called it, etmn. The prehistoric Proto-Indo-European term etmn is as close as we get to a soul. It is the merging point of matter and spirit, a marriage of heaven and earth. It is basically the divine in the manifest world. And Dumézil calls this third component cosmos or breath. It is his sacral part of the tripartite society, and the head in the metaphor with the body. The Greeks sometimes called it logistikon, and its primary desire is wisdom, insight, and connection to the divine. Atman is the incorporeal and imperishable essence of a living being, and it is by Atman that every living being pushes through life towards the ultimate purpose. Both the second and third component of you is immortal, but this is in a way where we are truly immortal, even beyond samsara. This part is eternally eternal, without beginning and without end, because it is of the divine itself. Since the Atman is eternal, birth therefore is never the creation of it, but only a transmigration from one body to another. It's important to remember when it comes to rebirth in the samsara that it's not all parts of you that start all over every time. The divine atman within us is constant no matter where we go. You don't change the divine. And you've sometimes heard me saying that when Indian people or a follower of Sanatana Dharma say the greeting Namaste, they mean that the divine in themselves bow to the divine in the person they meet. Because we're all of the divine, and it's constantly within us and constantly beautiful. When the Norse say Megin, when the Vedic peoples say prana, when the ancient Greeks say pneuma, the Chinese say shi, and when the Celtic Druids say nuifre, we all mean the same thing. The divine breath or wind that's been blown into everything, making it animate. Odin does it, Rudra or Shiva does it with the first roaring breath. In a previous episode, I've said that Shiva means no thing, meaning that the breath of Shiva is everything that's true, and not the temporary and limited material world. We also see it in the god Vayu, meaning wind, who personifies the constantly blowing wind of life. And Atman literally means that which breathes in Sanskrit. And just for fun, I can mention that to breathe and breath in German is called atman and atem. Just so we can see that this concept is still around whether we know it or not. It is this first breath that is the first sacrifice. It becomes the manifest world. And this is also one of the reasons a part of your own spirituality is sacrifice and prayer. Because everything we do with love, care, intention, and passion contains Megin, life force. And as always in Indo-European spirituality, it is reciprocal. We've been given the breath, and in return we give Megin back to the gods and to Chartus. That way we help creating the Chartus every day. Atman is given to Brahman. We, so to say, sacrifice ourselves to ourselves. Do you recognize that from somewhere? Atman is the real meaning of the rune manas. It means what is true within mankind, your true self. When you've been stripped off of everything that's untrue and temporary, all temporary bodies, thoughts, personality, desires and fears, all your belongings, even your Hamingja, when you've detached from everything, then what's left is Atman, who you really are, the divine you. The reason Krishna tells Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita, do not fear, is because nothing can really happen to him. When we overcome spiritual amnesia, when we drop our ignorance and understand that Atman is Brahman, that you are of the divine, that's when you do not fear. That's when you become self-realized and God-realized. You cannot die. For the Proto-Indo-Europeans, death could have several outcomes. There were various paths you could walk in the afterlife. And based on how many lives you've lived, how self-aware you are, how much insight you've gained, what honorable deeds you've done, how unselfish you've been, and what component of yourself has been your main focus, the result of your death altered. At the moment of death, the person's thread of life is cut off by nemos. Said person goes into a deep sleep. The memory and wisdom, called mintnis, the thoughts, emotions, fears, desires, and all the other worldly aspects of the person are taken by the Lady of Death. This is where you, so to say, forget about the self you had in this life. This is also a way to show that the first component of yourself isn't really your real self. It's a temporary, experienced and perishable aspect, a vehicle. The interesting thing here is that the first component, the kvistis, doesn't disappear either, but remains here in this world and will continue into other people. These parts belong here and are forever tied to samsara, or of life on earth. The body of the dead is placed in the grave together with objects that belong to you in life, to be found in future lives and to remember yourself and the insight you've gained in that life, to accumulate your spirit. The body is placed here in the grave as alfar, the white shining ones, waiting for the first rays of the sun to return at winter solstice and to be reborn. Component 2 and 3 take on the true shape of yourself. Remember what I've said about Hamingja meaning shape-shifting, that your honor, insight, protection and luck takes the shape of your filgja, the follower or totem that attaches to the new child you're born into. The Proto-Indo-Europeans called this skotos, your shade. So no matter what person or being you will become in future lives, your Hamingja and filgja will always come with you, because they are immortal, but they belong eternally to this world. In this true shape, you are then transported to the entrance of the underworld with assistance by the psychopomp Pauson. The underworld was called Budmen, meaning bottom. Budmen is a sunless realm beneath the surface of the earth and receives all the dead. It is made solely for the dead, invisible to the living. Life, just like order and truth, shines in the bright sunlight, while the other is symbolized by darkness. Life is Deus, the heavenly light, and death is Regos, the abyssal darkness. In life, we see the light of Saul, or Sovilo, but one day we'll leave her radiance. Will be removed from her light, and Budmen is where most people go. After passing the entrance to the underworld, the deceased then reaches the river of the dead, Nawis. Rivers are liminal and holy places throughout Indo-European spirituality. To cross the river, he or she pays the ferryman geronts, called charon by the Greeks and Romans. Across the river, there's a gate into the underworld guarded by gereds, the three-headed dog. This is where a choice arises, or maybe rather a discernment. Various scenarios can take place. Remember that you are now pure component 2 and 3, your Hamingja and your atman. Those who haven't grown and learned enough during the previous life, those who aren't honorable enough, not worthy or not enough spiritually aware, will just pass through the gate and be reborn straight away into a similar worldly life that you've had so many times before. And nothing wrong with that. Many people stay in this cycle. And I mean, a life among your family and tribe is a great thing. But hopefully you'll learn more this time. Hopefully you'll find a better balance between what's truth and beauty and what's just false ego and desire. A person like this is also barely even aware of his or her component 3, the divine atman and the connection with the chartus. So she has no chance of going in a divine direction. However, if you don't get back into the cycle of samsara, you continue to the cattle pastures rhodos agros, meaning joyful plain. Your Hamingja, Fylgja, Klevos, etc. here join the collective spirits of the ancestors, the pateres materesque. You become a part of the eternal ancestors, and even though this too belongs to the worldly and physical realm, you can still be communicated with and still belong to life. It's still about eternal rebirth. You still belong to your kin, Odala. Then there's another discernment. The most eminent and self-realized ancestors, the shining white ones, proceed even further to what the Proto-Indo-Europeans called Albion, meaning the White Mountains. Interestingly enough, this is cognate with the first known name of the UK. And Ptolemaios called this Aluion, which is also quite close. Those who are enlightened, self and God realized, who have followed dharma, who have meant extra much to others in life, who have acted with arethere, and who have been heroes of their own story, they come to Albion. You are now both immortal and eternal. You have nothing more to prove. But here you have the privilege to make a very important choice. Some of the white ones actually choose to go back to life on earth, to be a sage and guide to others who need their insight and example. This is what the Buddhists call a bodhisattva, an enlightened Buddha who has returned to life to teach the true natural order. The Hindus call this a Satguru, a true guru who has transcended samsara but chosen to return to the world for the sake of others. Remember that Valhall means both a hall for the dead, but also a hall for the choice, Valur. You are in the uterus choosing to be born or not, and choosing what shape you'll take on based on your previous actions. Ask not what your life can do for you, but what you can do for your life. Karma is to craft your own destiny. But those who are fully accomplished, those who have lived enough to be fully enlightened and God-realized, those who have fully realized that the truest part of us is the etmn or the atman, that we are part of the divine, and that's where we belong. They can also choose to transcend the physical and forever leaving it behind and merge into Brahman or the Chartus. This is what the Hindus call moksha, liberation. Not having to strive and live anymore, but to be complete in the divine. It's often also called nirvana. And here I actually have a wild theory that I've never actually heard anyone mentioning before. Nirvana is a Sanskrit term meaning no wind. Of course, meaning that the closer you are to liberation and full enlightenment, the less life, suffering, desire, etc. you have to go through. And when you reach nirvana, there's symbolically no wind. It's completely calm and lull. And as I'm sure you all know, the more insight, experience, and Hamingja we acquire, the higher we climb the world tree, Yggdrasil. And at the top of the tree, there's an immense eagle. And between the eyes of that eagle, on the third eye, so to say, there's a falcon or a hawk called Veðurfölnir. This literally means lull, or the abated wind, the wind that has calmed down. And to me, that's not a coincidence. Traditional Indo-European life definitely isn't about renouncing this world or waiting for paradise. Instead, we worship nature and life itself. We value strive, endeavor, growth, and excelling in life. And we honor and cherish our body, because it is the vehicle of the spirit. It is our mantra, the frequency of the song we're singing right now. There's a part of every living thing that wants to become itself. The tadpole into the frog, the chrysalis into the butterfly, a damaged human being into a whole one. That is life, that is nature, and that is spirituality. The world tree Yggdrasil is real, and so is our life in it. It is real and it is beautiful. Many people live in this physical world lifetime after lifetime. It's a place full of wonders and beautiful things. But it should be you who are in control of those things, not the other way around. We mustn't use this life for exploiting materialism and selfishness. If you're in a paradigm of being Gollum, then you only see the first component and the material aspect of life. That's when many get lost. They feel empty and without purpose, no matter how high the piles of money they sit on are. Such a life is full of ego and fear. It's interesting that the more we grow, the more we put things behind us. We give to become rich. We in a way become smaller to step into something much, much bigger. And it's almost ironic that the true self is selfless. One could think that the higher we climb in Yggdrasil, the windier it would get, but in fact it's the opposite. Let's remember that Chartus strives for harmony and balance between its parts. To be healed, to be whole, we mustn't exclude aspects of ourselves, and we mustn't let any part take over. We need to understand that we consist of more than matter. We can't just live a material life. We need to anchor to the other two parts of ourselves too. And I once again quote Rig Veda. When there is harmony between the mind, the heart, and the dissolution, then nothing is impossible. So we need to find our true calling and follow it. Because if it is your calling, it will keep calling you until you listen. We need to connect to our Hamingja, and we need to be spiritual every day to self-realize, realize that we are some of the air in the big breath. This world is painfully wonderful, but the Chartus tells us that there's even more. And to progress in that direction, small parts of us die continuously through our many lives. We leave them behind. But even if parts of you die off, it doesn't mean that there's less of you. We fear death because we fear loss. Loss of near and dear ones. Loss of all the beauty in this world. Loss of ourselves. We fear death because we fear the end. And that the end has many outcomes. But maybe you remember another scene in The Lord of the Rings, when the elves leave Middle-earth after the big battle has been won. They say their time has come. They leave this world. They even leave their physical bodies behind. They don't need them anymore. because they will be forever remembered for all they did for this world and for us. They've acted as role models, and they leave us with an example. They leave us with an immortal memory. They leave us with their Hamingja. They go to the undying lands in the west, where the sun sets and there's no wind. Nirvana. They are us, we are them. So do not fear. This is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end. But it is perhaps the end of the beginning. I want to thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe so you increase your Hamingja straight away. You will find more information about the podcast and the foundation on hamingja.foundation. You will also find us on Instagram, Discord and YouTube, and more platforms will follow. Feel free to contact us if you have questions, requests or need guidance. I hope to hear from you soon and that you'll tune in next time. And until then, seek not the religion of your ancestors. Seek what your ancestors sought.